Hey there, I'd just like to ask before the video starts, if you like what you see, please give us a click on the like and subscribe buttons. Hello, I'm Karl Wells. My guest today is a performer, an actor, a musician, singer, and a tour operator. Now, he came here in 2016 originally to do an opera, actually, Sweeney Todd, with opera on the Avalon. But he's most famously known for a production we've all heard of and come to love. It's called Come From Away. He was in the Toronto production of Come From Away, and he played the mayor in that production. Then he decided to move to Newfoundland, and he set up his own tour company called George's Tours. And he's here with me now, taking a break from, you know, being a tour guide to have a chat with me. Welcome, George Masswohl.
Thanks, Karl.
Nice to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
Show.
Thank you, sir.
George, now let's tell people where you're from originally and where you grew up.
Yeah, I was born in Hamilton, Ontario, and I grew up in St. Catharines. So Hamilton's my hometown technically. We moved to St. Catharines when I was 2, and I grew up there. And then I left St. Catharines around 17 and went to join a theater company in Hamilton, and then just went on from there. Went to school in London, Ontario, lived in Toronto for 30 years, and here I am.
Wow. So now you ended up in theater. I'm just wondering, were your parents at all arts-oriented?
No, not as far as I knew in those days. My father, as it turns out, was a frustrated painter, and discovered that once he retired. Not until his 60s, but from that point on, he became quite prolific as a painter. And my mom was a nurse. So my mom came from Scotland in '58 because she had dreams of being Anne of Green Gables. And never went to PEI until I was there at the festival. But my dad came from Austria in '51 and was trained as a banker and worked for what was called Canada Manpower at the time. And so that was what his career was in the employment game. And I have 2 older siblings, and neither of them are in show business either. It was just my thing. It was always my thing. I don't remember ever wanting or thinking of doing anything else.
I'm just curious. A lot of people who get into show business, for want of a better term, they tend to be shy. They were shy kids, and always, you know, surprised people by getting into the business because because of that fact that they were shy. Were you a shy kid?
Well, I think so. In many ways, yes. But I developed the exoskeleton of theater and arts very early, almost before my own memory begins. So I remember being involved in that and finding comfort and my voice through that very early on. But you are right. It tends to be a haven for sort of the disenfranchised. When we're younger, we find our people in the drama clubs, or in the interfaith fellowship clubs, or in the AV department, and I found mine in music and theater.
So, you mentioned drama clubs. Mm-hmm. Were there institutions like drama clubs, church events, that sort of thing, that sort of attracted you and you became involved with, that helped you hone your craft?
I'd say yes. I remember being in nursery school, actually, pre-kindergarten. My earliest memory of performing was in Jack and the Beanstalk in a church basement where I was in nursery school. I can't remember if I was Jack or the Giant, that's my earliest memory. So in my nursery school, they were already promoting that. And then I attended drama classes privately in that same church basement. So yeah, it was actually a hub. although it wasn't our church. Yeah.
Did you say you were involved in summer theater?
Well, I have been many, many times, yes.
Yeah, and so tell me about that experience. Your first summer theater experience, and was it in Hamilton?
Yeah, so I was already starting to do community theater, and there was a small professional theater company in St. Catharines at the time called Press Theater. And because I was the up-and-coming theater kid, when they needed people to flesh out the ensemble that they didn't have to pay, they came to the high school drama teachers and said, who are your kids who are drama interested? And then we got to be in the play. So I started networking at that point. And then there was an audition advertised in the Hamilton Spectator for a summer student company, like All-Star Hamilton Student Company. Well, I didn't live in Hamilton, so we went to Hamilton. I auditioned. We gave my uncle's address in Hamilton so that I had a Hamilton address. I lied, Karl, is what happened. And I got in the cast, and so I was in this summer group of all kids my age, but who were the cream of their school's drama departments. Plus, they hired a couple of professional actors to work with us and mentor us, which is funny because that's kind of what brought me to Newfoundland in 2016. Cheryl Hickman and Jonathan Monroe asked me if I would come and work at Opera on the Avalon, which is a teaching company. So I was then in that mentorship role here. So that's what I started with. It was a company called New Faces in Hamilton, and we occupied a Hamilton place, and we did 3 shows in Rep each summer. I did 2 summers there on the main stage at Hamilton Place. So it was a great experience for all of us, and many of us went into the business thereafter.
So, is it fair to say that most of your work has been in musical theater? Have you done plays?
Yes, certainly, and I started out that way. But you know, when a talent is identified, that kind of gets pushed. So, because I could sing, I ended up in musicals. And
yes, not all actors can sing.
No, that's true, and not all singers can act.
Right.
So I found a way to do both. So yes, I went into that, and not to mention also, hell of a dancer, Karl.
Got to be able to dance if you're doing a musical, right?
I know, it doesn't look like it on the outside, but this guy can move.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot of movement in, well, Come From Away, for example. But before we get to that, I'm just curious. Were you the type of kid who watched a lot of movies?
Yes.
Watched a lot of musicals?
I watched with my mother. So I was a swimmer as a kid, and I was prone to ear infections. So there were many nights I remember lying awake with pain in my ear, and my mother would put eardrops. So I would lie with my head on her lap, and we would watch Elwee Saturday Night at the Movies, which was a TV Ontario thing. I don't know. Did you get it here? Were you able to see it?
Well, you know, I know about it. We did not get it on TV Ontario because, of course, we're not in Ontario.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, and I'm dating myself now, Elwee Yost used to do a program on CBC in the afternoons, and he'd start out on a Monday. And he would show half an hour of a movie, and then on Tuesday he'd show the next half hour, and by the time you got to Friday, you saw the whole movie.
Oh, that's great.
So I remember watching The Invisible Man, and with Claude Rains, and Elwee Yost would come on and he'd describe, you know, the character and what was going to happen in this particular section of the movie. And
so he carried that forward into a longer format when he went to Saturday Night at the Movies then.
Exactly.
And for me as a young boy interested in this genre, film, television, theater, whatever it is, acting. I just liked acting. I knew that I liked what they did. I was interested in figuring out how they did it, telling stories. One of the reasons I love being here. This place is so much about storytelling and folklore. I love it. Oral tradition, saga, they call it in Iceland, right? Yeah, I would lie awake with my mom often, even when I wasn't suffering from an ear infection, but my mom and I would watch together old movies that Elwee Yost would air one, and then he would talk about that and maybe have a guest and interview them and then air another one. Often I couldn't stay up for the second one. But I saw, you know, that's what I saw Wuthering Heights. That was my first experience seeing Olivier act, and Hepburn, all of them. And I loved that style of acting too, that they used to, because they were all British theater actors. And so I wanted that. I wanted to do that so badly. I just wanted to get one job. That's all I ever wanted.
Yeah, yeah. Now, speaking of that one job, do you remember your first paid job as an actor?
My first paid job was at the Press Theater when I was a kid in high school, and then that summer program, New Faces, we were paid. So that was a government seed program to a higher student program, basically. And then, but I got my equity card doing Guys and Dolls at the Sudbury Theater Center around the fall of '91, I think. Yeah, I went away to school, and my father didn't want me to go into this professionally, because as an immigrant, struggling to make it in Canada, it was important to him, like many immigrant parents, that their kids do something solid, which that didn't appear to be. But I always believed that it could be.
Sure.
And so we fought a lot about that. And it drove us apart in many ways in those days. We came around on that eventually, but yeah. So I was I was a bit of a rebel in doing it, and so I went away. We made a deal. I would go to university. I was going to move to Toronto. I had an agent. I was going to move to Toronto and just keep working at 18, but he wanted me to get a degree. So I made a deal with him. If I got in anywhere, I would go. And I was admitted to the University of Western Ontario to the opera performance program. So I studied that very briefly and switched into English Lit, and loved my time at Western, as it turns out, and made some of the most important connections of my life that are still with me today. So it was time well spent. But the day I was finished, I got a call and offered the gig at the Sudbury Theater Center, and off I went.
So just staying in the Toronto area, Canadian Stage did a production of London Road, which won a Dora Mabor Moore Award, which I guess would be kind of the equivalent of a Tony Award.
Yeah, they're the Toronto version of that.
Toronto version of the Tonys, Dora Mabor Moore Awards. So you were in an ensemble cast that won that award.
Yeah.
That must have been a big high for you and your colleagues.
Well, particularly for that piece, because it was very challenging, probably the most challenging thing I've ever done in performance. Well, there was a play I did a couple years ago that was so dense it was very difficult to remember the lines, but this musically, this is a piece written, a verbatim musical, written by Alec E. Blythe and Adam Cork, who were commissioned by the National Theatre in the UK to create this piece, and they performed it at the National, and then the Canadian Stage is the only other production of it ever, so far to date. But it's very challenging. A lot of actors, most actors that I know of in Toronto wanted that job, or either looked at the material and said, I don't want anything to do with it. And I was really intrigued by it, and fortunately ended up being cast in it. And the cast was magnificent. It was all stars. And the musical director, Reza Jacobs, taught us the score backwards. We started at the end of the score and learned it backwards, which for some reason he had devised was the most efficient way. And we did learn it, but it reduced these monsters of the Canadian theatre to quivering messes. We had group therapy sessions over this script and the score and the difficulty of learning it. But in the end, it was brilliant, and it was a very worthwhile topic. It dealt with a serial murderer in Ipswich, UK, a true story. And the show was based on interviews done by these two writers with the actual people involved. So in many ways, it was like Come From Away, structurally, because it was based on true stories and interviews done by the creators. The only thing is, they were verbatim interviews in London Road, and Come From Away was more of a dramatized piece.
And then you ended up coming here to do Sweeney Todd.
Well, I had done Sweeney Todd a number of times. If I was known for anything before Come From Away, it was probably Sweeney Todd. So I'd done it a number of times in Vancouver, a couple of times, and in 2015, I think it was, my Sweeney Todd career had been dormant for a dozen years, but the Vancouver Opera was in a situation where their big opera star singer that they had hired was he was missing 2 or 3 notes in the middle of his voice.
Oh.
And so I got a call out of the blue saying, could you sing Sweeney Todd in Vancouver tomorrow night? And I said, yeah, because you say yeah, and then figure it out. So I got on a plane, I was in Vancouver the next day, and seated in the audience between the Premier of BC and the Mayor of Vancouver, and the performance began, and I heard him lose his voice. So I went backstage, and I took over about 15 minutes into the performance. We finished it, and then I went on again the next day, which saved the Vancouver Opera a ton of money.
George, that is so brave.
Well, I don't know.
So brave.
I don't know if it is or not. I just went for it, right? And you know, when big opportunities come my way, I try and say yes. And if there's a modicum of doubt in my brain, I figure it out. So that is what I did there, and that's what I've kind of been doing for my whole life, is figuring it out.
So how was the experience doing Sweeney Todd here when you did it here?
Well, this is why I got the call. It was because it was in opera news around North America. It was on CBC As It Happens, all that stuff. So it started bubbling again.
Yeah.
And my good friend Jonathan Monroe, who I'm sure you know,
yes,
and is well known to your viewership, I'm sure, called me and said, hey, I'm directing and musically directing for the opera company in St. John's, Sweeney Todd. I really want you to come do it. And I said, Johnny, yes, when and where? I'm there. I've never been to Newfoundland before, and I don't know anything about like most Canadians, don't know much about the place. So I took the opportunity, said yes. And Karl, as the plane was coming through the fog and the clouds, and I saw the forests and the ponds below, wasn't anything like what I was expecting. And I actually felt something grab my gut, and I knew change was occurring.
And then you did Come From Away, and was that the catalyst?
No, the catalyst was a person named Deneen Conley.
Okay.
Who I met within my first, I say hour, but I'm being dramatic about it. She'll say it was about 2.5 hours. So I was in town about 2.5 hours, and I was out looking for some food, and it was May 27th. It was 1 degree, and the wind was blowing so strong that I couldn't fall down if I tried. And I found my way it was a Sunday evening, I found my way to the Underbelly and had a nice steak. And then I walked down Water Street and saw a little sandwich board outside of the old Black Sheep that said open mic. And I thought, St. John's open mic is going to be brilliant, because I know the musicians here are amazing across the board. So I went in, and there were about 4 people in there, and one of them was Deneen, and we chatted and we spent some time together that month. And there were some complications to overcome there, but we did. And then about 6 months later, I was asked to audition for Come From Away, and Deneen helped me with the accent. And
wow,
and
that's good.
And I auditioned, and well, the rest is history.
Yeah. What is it about that show that speaks to people? I mean, it became such an international hit. I mean, was that a surprise to you, that it became so? I mean, I was in London and saw the billboards, and and it's in many other countries. It was in many other countries as well. It took off. Well,
we all needed something around that event. Maybe we didn't know it, but you need trauma. You need the human experience is reflected in art. Artists reflect human experience so that we can see ourselves through a different lens. And that story needed to be told at some point. And how are you going to tell that story? So Michael Rubinoff was aware of the documentary that Tom Brokaw had made for the Winter Olympics, and thought it was a good idea for a musical.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that's how it started. I know of the Tom Brokaw documentary, but I didn't realize that the two were
Yeah,
like
and,
that.
and I may not be 100% accurate on that because the book, The Day the World Came to Town, also plays a part
Yeah.
in the early days. But Michael then pitched the story to some writers, and David and Irene were the ones who chose to go down that path, and then went to Gander for the 10th anniversary of 9/11 and just started interviewing people. And one of my favorite stories from that Claude tells me, who I ultimately played, was that he said when they first came into the office to interview him, they chatted for a while, and once they left, he buzzed his receptionist and he said, "There's two kids going to be on welfare," for telling a story about people at Gander. And of course, the opposite is true. They've done quite well for themselves. But the reason the story is so popular worldwide is because it's a beautiful story about beautiful people who did a beautiful thing, and at a time at a very, very unusual time. Imagine those people not even knowing where they are in the world, and not knowing if they're going to be there for the night or forever. And the people of Gander too not knowing, and I know it wasn't just Gander, and it was Newfoundland, and it was Canada. Airports were taking planes everywhere, but unique in Gander because of such a small insular community for so long, and then boom. I mean, I'm sure Claude never envisioned a day like that in his when he decided to run for mayor. You know?
No, and the other thing about Gander is they had a lot of space there.
Yes.
Like literally airport space.
Yes.
So then you end up living here, and you've started this tour company, which is in some way linked to Come From Away. Just explain that to me.
Well, yeah. So when I've got to stop saying yeah. My tour guests this morning are from the Carolinas, and they said, it's rude to say yeah.
Okay.
I said, well, not really. It's positive, I think. Anyway, yes, Karl. Yeah. But yes, so, well, a lot of complicated things happened during the pandemic, and one of them was when Come From Away closed in March of 2020, initially because of the pandemic, March 13th, Friday the 13th, we were encouraged to hang on, not take any other gigs, stick around, because we were coming back in a month, 2 months, so on and so forth. But, you know, we weren't being retained or anything, so I was sitting in Toronto paying a lot of money in rent. Deneen had come to Toronto to spend that time with me. My stepson Logan was up there as well and was going to attend George Brown. And none of that happened because of the pandemic. So we were just sitting there in a very expensive house, and my income had stopped. So after a year of that, Deneen said, let's go home to Newfoundland. It's getting worse up here, and Newfoundland's doing all right. So we came home, and it was the best thing. I had already been planning to retire here around now. The only difference is the pandemic took retirement off the table. So then we went back in end of 21 to try and bring Come From Away back, and it lasted only 10 performances, and then Omicron came through and they shut us down permanently. So that was my financial comeback plan, a pretty good one, but then that rug got pulled out from under and we weren't coming back. So I had to come up with something to do if I wanted to be here. And also the age that I was at and the amount of time I'd spent in show business in the theater in Canada, I kind of saw the writing on the wall for myself and decided it was time to change. And I love it here and I want to be here. So I came up with a few ideas and pitched them to various entities, and this was the one that the lights were green all the way.
Well, I think it's great. Now, just describe a typical, try to describe George's tour for me. You know, where do you take
we go?
people?
What do we do?
How does it work?
Yeah, it's, well, the initial concept was going to be a Come From Away reality tour, and I asked the Junkyard Dogs, the New York producers of Come From Away, if I could use the branding in Newfoundland, and they granted me those rights, which was very, very, very useful. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I initially was going to do a 4-day Come From Away reality tour where I take people to Gander, meet all the real people, stop in Dover, zoom in Nick and Diane, who were the couple who fell in love there. All of that stuff was arranged. But then when I got here in June of 2022, ultimately, I didn't want to be away from home 4 days a week. So I thought, that's not going to work for me. So I just started out on a small scale in a little car through Airbnb experience, doing a local tour, Cape Spear, Petty Harbor, Signal Hill, Kitty Vitty. But I also took people to my favorite, so you keep hitting the mic. I also took people to my favorite places. So one of the first places Deneen ever took me when I came here was St. Philip's. So I would take people to St. Philip's to listen to the Rolling Rocks. And we'd have lunch by the beach, and the freshest fish you can get right there overlooking Conception Bay. And I'm very good friends with Greg Hocko, who grew up on Bell Island, so we talk a lot about Bell Island. And we have a band together, and we released a song about the ponies who worked in the mine called Bell Island Pony. So I tie that all in with them, and I share my personal experiences with them. Many times they're fans of the show, many times they're not, but they also like the showbiz stories. And why a mainlander has chosen to live here. Why have I chosen to live here? And I also have a kind of a not so secret agenda based on when I first arrived here, the current government had just been installed, and I was listening to the Premier's speech, and he was talking about the debt versus population dilemma, and that immigration and investment are the keys to that. So I thought, in my small way, I can affect that. And I have done so, Karl. I already have 3 people moving here.
You mentioned Greg Hocko. You're in a group called the Rowdymen.
Correct, yeah.
A musical group. Tell me about that group.
Sure. Well, that emerged out of Come From Way. So Greg and I met in Come From Way. We were in Winnipeg, where we launched the Canadian production. And we were at a party, and I said to Greg, this is going to be big, and people are going to learn about Newfoundland that have never been there or know anything about it, and they're going to want more Newfoundland culture. I said, we should do something that lives past Come From Way. It'll be around forever, I hope. But that we can continue to take Newfoundland culture to people. So he said, let's have a band, and him coming from a musical background, and he said, we got to get Jerry Finn. Now, I didn't know who Jerry Finn was, but fans of music, Canadian rock music in Newfoundland will know. Apparently, I've learned that Jerry's quite legendary. He plays in a band called Killer Dwarfs. He plays with Burton Cummings. He was in Helix. He's all over the place. So we got Jerry Finn, and we decided we're going to do Newfoundland music, traditional, contemporary, and original. So that's what we've been doing, and we've been playing to the Newfoundland diaspora across Canada in mining communities and so on and so forth, and also performing arts centers. So we've been doing that now we formed during the pandemic, and we've been doing that with the increasing success for the last couple of years. And in fact, we're doing our first Arts and Culture Center tour in the fall, and we'll be here in St. John's in November.
Well,
2024, November 24.
And I wish you the best success with that, and the best success with George's tours.
Thanks,
going
Karl.
forward.
Thank you very much.
And hopefully, maybe you'll find time to get back on the stage at some point too.
It comes up from time to time.
We'll
so,
see.
Yeah.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, Karl.
And that's it for today's program. Thank you for watching. I'm Karl Wells. We'll see you again next time.